A strange story unfolded in the streets of ancient Athens. A man who had renounced everything sat in an empty barrel, watching the bustling citizens around him, asking them the same question. "Step aside, you're blocking my sun." His name was Diogenes, and he was a madman. At least that's how people perceived him. But if you look carefully, this lunatic understood something that millions of people don't understand even now, 2,500 years later. He understood that life is simple by nature, and all the complexity we add to it is not development, but a slow disease. The modern human is a paradoxical creature. He accumulates more and more, believing that this will bring him happiness. But each new purchase, each new possession, each new status creates an additional chain that binds him to the earth. A house requires repairs. A car requires maintenance. Clothes require care. Money requires protection. Life becomes an endless list of obligations, and the man who dreamed of freedom becomes a slave to his own things. This is not a metaphor. It's a literal psychological reality that affects the brain every day. Neuroscientists have shown that when a person is surrounded by an excessive amount of things, his brain is in a constant state of low-level stress. The visual cortex receives too much information to process. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and planning, becomes overloaded. It's like a computer trying to run 100 applications simultaneously. Productivity drops, reaction time slows, and the feeling of fatigue becomes chronic. People come home and feel exhausted, even though they haven't done anything physically demanding. The blame lies in the order of their rooms and their lives. Diogenes watched this and saw that people had trapped themselves in the nets of their own desire. He lived with one garment, a cup, and a stick. That was all. And because of this, he gained something that millions seek: inner freedom. Not the freedom promised by advertisements, but real, genuine freedom that comes from understanding that you are not dependent on things. That you are not afraid to lose them because you have only what is necessary. That your mind is free for contemplation, for reflection, for genuine communication with others and with yourself. In psychology, there is a concept called hedonic adaptation. The essence of it is that a person quickly becomes accustomed to new things and soon returns to his baseline level of happiness. You buy a new phone. For a week, you're happy. Then you adapt. You buy a car. For a month, you enjoy it. Then it becomes normal. You bought your dream house. For a year, you're delighted. Then you start seeing its flaws. And what happens? You're back at the starting position, but now you have a million new worries and concerns. A person who lives simply avoids this trap. For him, each day is a discovery of beauty in the simple. A ray of sunshine in the window, a cup of water, a conversation with a friend. These things never lose their charm. Psychologists have also discovered a phenomenon called decision fatigue. Every day, the modern person makes thousands of micro-decisions. Which shirt to wear from hundreds? Which brand of yogurt to choose? Which car to take? Which restaurant to visit? And while each decision seems insignificant, collectively, they exhaust the brain's cognitive resources. By the end of the day, a person cannot make even a simple decision. His mental battery is drained. A person living simply avoids this. He has one shirt. He knows what to wear. He has simple food. He doesn't need to choose. His brain conserves energy for important things: creativity, thinking, personal growth. There is also an interesting psychological phenomenon called possession attachment. People often transfer their emotions and identity onto the things they own. They think, I am my car, my house, my clothes. This creates a fragile identity that depends on external factors. If your car is stolen, you feel robbed not just materially, but emotionally. Diogenes avoided this because he had nothing that could be stolen. His identity was based not on things, but on his thoughts, his character, his principles. And this gave him incredible psychological resilience. He could not be broken because there was nothing to grab him by. Modern science also reveals that the environment influences our thinking at a deep level. Disorder in a room correlates with disorder in the head. The amount of visual stimuli affects the quality of sleep. An abundance of things creates a subconscious sense of burden. Researchers from the University of California found that women whose homes were cluttered had elevated levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. This is not a psychological placebo effect, it's a physiological reality. Simple living, a minimalist environment, is not an aesthetic choice. It's an investment in your own psychological and physical health. But how do you start living simply when there are so many temptations around? When society constantly says that happiness is bought? Here another psychological mechanism comes into play, the power of habit and social proof. People act out of habit, even if the habit harms them. They buy because others buy. They accumulate because their friends accumulate. They participate in the rat race because everyone participates in it. But one of the most powerful psychological forces is the ability to say no. And Diogenes was the embodiment of this no. He looked at lavish feasts and said, "I prefer simple bread." He looked at luxurious houses and said, "My barrel is more comfortable." He looked at social status and said, "I am freer than all your kings." There is another aspect that is often overlooked. When life becomes complicated, when you have too much, you start living fast. You rush to work to earn money to maintain your things. You rush home to take care of them. You rush on weekends because you need to do everything. Speed becomes the norm of life, but psychological research shows that hurry and stress are inseparable. When a person slows down, when he gets rid of the unnecessary and lives with less, he automatically slows down. His brain shifts from survival mode to existence mode. This seems like a small distinction, but it's the distance between running in fear and walking in peace. Psychologists speak of a state called flow. This is a moment when a person is completely absorbed in an activity, when time disappears, when there is no worry about the future or regret about the past. This is the state that an artist is in while creating, a musician while playing, an athlete while competing. This state is impossible to achieve if the mind is overwhelmed with concerns about things. A person who lives simply can more easily enter this flow because he has fewer distractions. His mind is free, and in this freedom, not only happiness is born, but also the meaning of life. Diogenes also understood something about human nature that modern psychology has only recently begun to confirm. People are social animals, and we need connections. We need to belong, but not to a group of people who accumulate and buy. We need to belong to something greater, something meaningful. Diogenes joined the Cynic philosophical school not because it was a fashionable status symbol, but because it was a community of people united by the ideal of simplicity and criticism of materialism. They understood each other on a deep level. This gave Diogenes a sense of belonging that is much deeper than any social connections based on competition and jealousy. There is an interesting psychological phenomenon called social comparison. People constantly compare themselves to others, and this comparison often becomes a source of unhappiness. A neighbor has a nicer house, you feel worse. A colleague has a more expensive car, you feel envious. A friend has more followers on social media, you feel less significant. This is an endless source of suffering. A person who lives simply and is not surrounded by many things avoids this trap. He has nothing to compare and therefore nothing to lose in the comparison. His joy in life does not depend on whether others have more or less. Neurologists have also discovered that meditation and contemplation activate completely different brain networks than those active when we buy, compete, and strive for more. When you meditate, when you simply sit and observe sunlight, your brain enters the default mode network, the passive mode network. This state is associated with self-awareness, creativity, and mental health. When you are in pursuit of more mode, a completely different network is active, and your brain works as if on high alert. Simple living naturally shifts the brain into a healthier mode. Psychology also reveals a mechanism called the hedonic treadmill. A person achieves a goal, gets a surge of dopamine, joy, but then this effect passes, and the person needs a new goal to feel joy again. It's like a treadmill. You run, but stay in place. People spend their lives chasing goals that don't actually bring lasting satisfaction. Diogenes realized that the way out of this treadmill is to stop running. His goal was not a big goal, his goal was wisdom and inner freedom. And these goals, unlike material ones, have a lasting, permanent result. When people talk about simple living, the objection often arises, isn't simplicity boring? Isn't it better to have many options, many entertainments? Psychology answers this paradoxically. Yes, it seems that many options are better than few, but in practice it's the opposite. A study called the Jam Study showed that when people were offered to choose jam from 6 options, they were happier than when choosing from 30. Why? Because with fewer options, there is less regret. You choose one and you're satisfied. But when there are many options, you constantly think that you chose wrong, that some other option would have been better. This creates a chronic state of dissatisfaction. A person who lives with little avoids this. In psychology, there is also the concept of autotelic activity. Activity that is valuable in itself, not for achieving some external goal. You read a book not because it raises your status, but because you enjoy the process of reading. Or you play music, not because you want to become famous, but because you enjoy the process itself. These activities bring deep satisfaction because they don't depend on external rewards. Simple living promotes this because you have time and mind for such activities. You don't clutter your life with goals, you simply live. There is also a psychological mechanism called ego depletion. When a person constantly makes an effort to maintain a certain image, to meet social expectations, his mental energy is exhausted. He is tense. But a person who lives simply doesn't need to conform to expectations. His life is his answer to society, and he doesn't need to spend energy on a mask. This gives him unusual psychological resilience. He can be genuine, and in this genuineness lies true strength. Diogenes walked through the streets of Athens in the daytime with a lantern in his hand. When people asked him why he was doing this, he would reply, "I am looking for a man." He meant that most people are not fully developed humans. They are slaves to their desires, their things, their social roles. They are not living, they are merely existing. Psychology confirms this observation. Most people live on autopilot. Their decisions are not made by them, but by their habits, their conditioning, their social environment. But Diogenes was truly alive. His decisions were his own. His life was his own. Psychologists have also studied the phenomenon of self-determination. It turned out that people are happier when they feel control over their lives, when they act in accordance with their inner values rather than external pressures. Diogenes was maximally self-determined. He lived as he thought was right, despite society's condemnation. And this gave him psychological well-being that is inaccessible to people who live according to others' expectations. Modern life has created the illusion that a more complicated life is a more developed life, that a person who owns more is better developed. In reality, it's the opposite. Simple living requires greater understanding, greater wisdom, greater personal growth. It's not a path for weak people. It's a path for those strong enough to say no to society. It's a path for those wise enough to see the illusion. Psychology shows that such people have higher levels of emotional intelligence, greater psychological flexibility, and a deeper sense of life's meaning. Neuroscientists have found that when a person lives in hurry, when he constantly focuses on external goals, His brain works in sympathetic nervous system mode, fight or flight mode. This state is useful for surviving immediate danger, but chronic residence in this state is destructive to health. It leads to chronic inflammation, immune system weakening, mental illness. Simple living, by contrast, activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Rest and digest mode. In this mode, the brain is relaxed, the immune system is strengthened, true healing and recovery occur. And this happens not through expensive spa treatments or meditation, but simply because life becomes simpler. When people talk about Diogenes, they often tell anecdotes about his eccentricity, how he urinated in public places, how he insulted people, how he was aggressive. But psychology reveals a deeper meaning in his behavior. It was not just madness. It was radical criticism of social norms that he believed were completely wrong. He was trying to wake people up. His behavior was a tool, a way to show the absurdity of living in accordance with conventions. Psychologists would call this norm violation, and it can be a very effective way to draw attention and change thinking. Modern happiness science shows that the greatest life satisfaction comes not from purchases, not from status, but from three main factors: close relationships, activity that has meaning, and freedom of action. Simple living maximizes all three of these factors. When life is simple, you have time for relationships. When life is simple, you can engage in what matters to you, not what makes money. When life is simple, you have maximum freedom, the freedom to act as you wish, not as your possessions require. There is an ancient psychological truth that modern people seem to have forgotten. Suffering comes from attachment, and a life cluttered with things is a life cluttered with attachments. Everything is a bond. Every possession is a potential source of pain, because everything you have, you can lose, and when you lose, you will suffer. Diogenes understood that the way to avoid this suffering is to have nothing to lose. This doesn't mean he didn't experience emotions, didn't feel joy. No, he experienced deep joy. But that joy was internal, psychological, not dependent on external factors. Psychology also reveals the concept of a baseline level of well-being. There is a theory that each person has a set level of happiness, and that external events have little effect on long-term happiness. But this theory has been reconsidered in light of new research. It turned out that lifestyle, chronic stress, health status, all of this can shift this set level up or down. Simple living is one of the most powerful ways to shift this level upward. When a person begins to live with less, his baseline level of well-being increases. Even simple things begin to bring him more joy. Finally, there is one deep psychological truth that Diogenes realized, but that most people never do. Life is not a destination, it is a process. But most people live as if life is a finish line they must cross as quickly as possible, and with as many trophies as they can. They postpone happiness until later. I will be happy when I buy a car, when I buy a house, when I get a promotion. And all these whens never come, because once you reach one goal, a new one appears. Diogenes, by contrast, understood that happiness is here and now, that every moment is life. And the simpler these moments, the less worry about things in them, the more joy they contain. The psychology of happiness shows that people who live simply, who practice minimalism, who have given up the pursuit of more, report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction. This is not just a subjective feeling. This is reflected in cortisol levels, in sleep quality, in illness rates. Their brains work better, their bodies are healthier, their relationships are deeper. And all of this is because they made one simple choice: to live simply. Diogenes was lying in the sun when the great Alexander the Great approached him. Alexander was a man who conquered the entire world, who owned everything one could own. He asked Diogenes, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And Diogenes replied, "Yes, step aside. You're blocking my sun." This was not rudeness. It was a profound psychological truth clothed in simple words. Diogenes was saying that the sun is enough, that existence in this world, with the ability to see light, breathe air, think your own thoughts, this is already enough, that everything else is excessive, it's superfluous, it creates unnecessary complications. Psychology finally confirms what ancient philosophers intuitively understood. Life is simple. Man is simple. His needs are simple. And when he tries to complicate this, when he adds layer upon layer of supposed needs and desires he does not develop, he disrupts his harmony. He creates internal conflict. He programs himself for suffering. But when a person returns to simplicity, when he removes the unnecessary, when he says no to temptations and yes to his inner sage, he finds what millions seek: true freedom, true happiness, true meaning. And it requires no money, no time, nothing but the willingness to see the obvious. The question that Diogenes asked his time, and which sounds clear to modernity, is very simple. What do you really want? Not what society tells you that you should want, not what your parents want, not what your friends want, but what you yourself, in the deepest corner of your psyche, really want. Most likely, if you're honest with yourself, the answer will be very simple. I want to be peaceful. I want to be free. I want to have enough food, a roof over my head, people I love, and time for thought. That's all. And everything else is noise. It's an illusion. It's a trap. Living simply is the best thing you can do for yourself, not because it's fashionable, not because it's right by some external standard, but because it aligns with the very nature of human happiness.